Hello, and welcome to the Freight Flow Advisor Brief. So picture this. You're driving down I-45 between Dallas and Houston. You glance over, and that 18-wheeler blowing past you at 8 a.m. has no one in the driver's seat. That isn't some future scenario. That's live freight right now. Today, we're talking about what that really means for rail, for trucking, for unions, and for anyone who cares about where freight margin is going in the next 3 to 5 years. So let's get into it. Autonomous trucking just went from pilot to production on a flagship lane. And it's not with a startup-friendly niche shipper. It's with McLane, who is one of the largest private fleets and distributors in the U.S. Now, if you're not a stranger to this show, you know we've covered autonomous trucking throughout the last few months. But if you haven't, Aurora Innovation and McLane have now moved from supervised testing to full driverless commercial hauls in Texas, running between Dallas and Houston. Over the last 3 years, they've logged about 280,000 autonomous miles and roughly 14,000 deliveries in pilot runs, with reporting that those runs hit 100% on time before McLane signed off on going driverless. So the plan is to expand those driverless middle mile lanes across McLane's Sunbelt distribution network by the end of 2026. At the same time, California, who's arguably the most important freight market in the country from a regulatory standpoint, has finally removed its long-standing weight limit ban on heavy-duty autonomous trucks. DMV rules allow manufacturers to apply for heavy truck testing and deployment permits, but with teeth. Up to 1 million test miles for heavy-duty vehicles across phased permits, including at least 500,000 miles in the relevant operating domain, with a minimum of 100,000 of those miles in California itself. So on one side, you have a big, credible private fleet going driverless on real freight, a major state opening a structured path for 10,000 plus pound autonomous trucks. On the other side, you have freight rail, and rail is not dead. It's far from it. Freight rail has now fully implemented positive train control on required routes after a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar rollout. PTC now overlays tens of thousands of miles with collision avoidance and speed enforcement logic. And the FRA data shows overall train accident rates continuing to improve. 2025 was cited as a record safety year by the Association of American Railroad, or AAR. So the battle line for the next 3 to 5 years looks like this. Driverless trucks are pushing into dense middle mile lanes just as rail is finally standing on a stronger digital safety platform. The real question is, who converts that technology foundation into market share? So let's be honest, nobody is running a driverless truck into a coal mine to compete with a unit train. That's not the fight. The vulnerable turf is intermodal and high value middle mile freight. The stuff that today bounces between truckload, intermodal rail, and dedicated fleets, depending on price, service, and capacity. So autonomous trucking's advantage is simple and brutal. Time isn't human. A robot doesn't care about hours of service. The Aurora McLane model keeps the autonomous rig on the highway for the middle mile while human drivers handle the last mile and customer touch points. That effectively stretches the trucking clock without violating any regulations, because the human's work is now a shorter, more local job. Consistency is a feature. In the pilot phase, this one program alone logged hundreds of thousands of miles with a perfect on-time record before McLane agreed to scale it up. That's exactly the kind of data a restaurant chain CFO or a big box retailer wants to see before they move serious volume. Unit costs will drop as soon as they're truly driver out. Today, some runs still involve an onboard human observer, as the state and federal regulators get more comfortable with the data and the companies before they remove that last person, which will unlock the labor delta that everyone is modeling. Now zoom out and look at California's new regime again. To deploy a heavy-duty driverless truck commercially, a manufacturer has to test at least 500,000 miles with a driverless testing permit in the proposed operating domain with at least 100,000 miles in California. Meet detailed safety reporting rules that mirror federal reporting. So that's not necessarily a green light. That's a high bar with a clear path. And what markets do operators go after once they've cleared that bar? They go after lanes where you can standardize routes. You can keep trucks moving 24/7, and you can amortize the tech over a lot of loaded miles. Those are exactly the lanes where intermodal rail has traditionally tried to win on cost per mile. Meanwhile, rail has its own automation story and it's not getting enough airtime. Take parallel systems. In Georgia, they've received FRA approval and are now launching a 160-mile commercial pilot in partnership with Genesee and Wyoming. These are autonomous battery electric rail cars that can run in platoons, not traditionally fixed length trains. Parallel has publicly said they have a backlog north of 300 autonomous rail cars with leading railroads and expert commercial operators to start rolling out in 2026. The mission is very explicit. They want to give railroads a more flexible, short haul option that chips away at truck first decisions on those middle distances. So if you're an investor, the frame shouldn't be will truck kill rail. The frame should be will autonomous truck commoditize long haul, middle mile, highway freight before autonomous rail and smart terminals can make rail more modular and truck competitive on the same lanes. Because those are the two curves that are now moving towards each other. So we'll get back into unions and regulation in a second. But first, a quick note for those of you who actually try to price this in the future, not just talk about it. This episode is brought to you by Freight FA. If you're listening to this show, you probably live in spreadsheets where these decisions get made every day. Do I renew that intermodal contract or split 30% to a new autonomous ready carrier? And that's exactly what Freight GPT inside of Freight FA is built to tackle. Instead of you manually stitching together rate sheets, fuel assumptions, and anecdotal broker quotes, Freight GPT lets you just ask simple questions in plain language and get lane level cost estimates that account for mode, including truckload, intermodal, rail, and emerging autonomous options where we have the data. You can look at distance, density, and equipment, commodity profile and service expectations, and even the regulatory friction we're talking about in this episode. Our other advantage is speed. Instead of waiting days for a consultant deck or digging through internal TMS exports, you get directional answers in minutes. So your team can spend more time making decisions and less time chasing data. If your job touches network design, procurement, or capital planning in freight, you need a way to price the future before the future gets priced for you. Freight GPT is that tool. To see what it looks like on your own lanes, head over to freightfa.com and request access. Again, that's freightfa.com. So as we get back to autonomous trucks versus rail, technology isn't operating in a vacuum here. Labor and regulation are going to decide how steep these adoption curves really are. On the trucking side, the Teamsters are in full defensive mode after California cleared the way for heavy-duty autonomous testing and deployment. Teamsters leadership basically said, and I quote, "We're going to fight this in the legislature, in the courts, and in the streets." Overdrive's coverage made it pretty clear. They see the DMV's move as a direct threat to human driver jobs in the largest freight state in the country. On the rail side, the unions are fighting a slightly different war: crew size and automation waivers. We saw the Biden administration move to lock in a two-person crew rule for many freight trains, arguing that it's a safety necessity. The railroads, backed by their trade groups, have been pushing hard to reverse that and allow one-person crews in more situations, saying it would save hundreds of millions of dollars over a decade. So why does that matter for autonomy? Because if you can't even get from 2 humans to 1 on a long train, it's going to be much harder politically to get to no humans on the consist, even if you have PTC and autonomous yard operations in place. In other words, trucking is fighting over how fast drivers can be removed from the middle mile. Rail is still fighting over whether you can remove even one person from the locomotive. That's not just a tech gap, that's a political sequencing gap. And then there's the structural driver shortage on the trucking side. Even apart from autonomy, the industry is staring at tens of thousands of unfilled seats and projections that the shortage could grow substantially toward the end of the decade as older drivers retire faster than new ones enter. That chronic pressure is exactly what makes the "we can't find drivers anyway" argument for autonomy politically palatable in a lot of states. So when you overlay the maps, Sunbelt and some Mountain West states are effectively saying, let's move, but show us the safety data. California is saying, we'll move, but only after you hit huge testing thresholds. And unions are trying to slow everything down long enough to renegotiate what work looks like on the other side. So if you're a shipper, it's not enough to know who has the better stack. You need to know who has a smoother political runway. So listen, over the next 3 to 5 years, you might be asking, where does this leave you? Here's my opinionated take. Autonomous trucking will carve out real share in specific middle mile corridors first. Think Dallas to Houston, DFW to Phoenix, distribution center to distribution center Sunbelt runs, where lanes look the same every day and the freight profile fits well within current safety envelopes. I also expect autonomous trucks to pick up a lot of cold chain market share. And you will see meaningful cost and service differentiation there before you see it everywhere. Rail will stay strong in bulk and dense intermodal, but the bar is rising. With PTC fully deployed and safety trending in the right direction, there's no excuse not to layer on more automation where it makes sense. The question is whether autonomous rail platforms like Parallel can move from pilot to scale quickly enough to keep rail relevant on shorter routes. Union and regulatory outcomes will create winners by region. A carrier with access to permissive Sunbelt states and shippers who can flex their network will have a very different cost curve than a carrier locked into a high friction market without a clear AV path. The real risk isn't picking the wrong mode, it's not pricing the transition. If you assume today's rail versus truck economics are static, you risk being the last one paying a rate on a lane where the market has quietly shifted to an autonomous assisted cost base. So, if you're a shipper, a carrier, a rail operator, the homework is clear. Start tagging the lanes in your network that look like Dallas to Houston. Watch where autonomous pilots move from press release to contracted volume. Track autonomous rail not as a science project, but as a potential shield for your rail share on short haul and regional routes. And make sure you have tools, whether it's your internal data science team or a platform like FreightFA, to actually model the cost and risk trade-offs before your competitors do. Because let's face it, the collision between autonomous trucks and rail isn't theoretical anymore. It's already happening at 65 miles an hour on real highways and on 160 miles of autonomous rail in Georgia. The only real question is, are you going to treat that as a background noise or as a signal to reprice your strategy? So thanks for listening to our show today. And listen, if you've enjoyed it, please share it with a colleague. If you'd like to follow us online, head over to LinkedIn and Facebook and just type in Freight Flow Advisor. And you can listen to this podcast on Spotify and Apple. You can also watch it on YouTube. If you wanted to do a deep dive on the autonomous revolution, head over to substack.com and search the Freight FA Brief, where you'll find several curated articles about Aurora, parallel systems, and many more that should be on your radar. Until next time, this has been your Freight Flow Advisor Brief.